Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And this is actually one of those white pilling videos. One of those videos that is showing that the Black Lives Matter and Black History movement are effectively running on life support. Nobody cares about it, apart from the few true believers that are left. The governments and devolved governments are not spewing out daily nonsense about Black History Month like they have done in the past. No, the most we've seen is on the first day of Black History Month. We saw a few people saying it's Black History Month, thumbs up, and that was pretty much it. You know, you've got Dawn Butler posting some schizo videos, but I'm saving that for a bigger video. And for the rest of Labour, I am literally seeing nothing about it. Not even from David Lammy, he's too busy being a terrible foreign secretary. But Britain's number one blacktivist is still pushing forward, pretending that his grift still has legs. And that is Kehinde Andrews, who is seen coping and seething here. There's no appreciation for the importance of black intellectual thought, so they get rid of it easily. You can't even call it erasure because there's so little black presence in British higher ed. It'll be completely wiped out, and he posts an article that it's from, saying that UK universities cut threatens to wipe out black scholarship, academics say, which of course they would say, because they got in on black scholarships, but all it seems to do is get absolutely crazy people at the top of universities, which in turn has made them an embarrassment. Kehinde Andrews has been quite open in the past that the only reason he managed to get black studies into Birmingham University as a serious course is basically because he told the deans, oh, this will make you money because I will get people into this course. He didn't at all say, oh, it will further academic studies, it will further the reputation of the university. No, it was literally just, this is profitable because of the business model we have, which basically any course would have done. Because any course will have got at least a few people in, which is worth way more than paying the professor, given that it's $9 grand a year to sit down in these courses. Anyway, his complaints here are getting, 20 retweets, 32 likes. The grift is over, effectively. Kehinde Andrews begging effectively for his job to stay in place barely gets any popularity. Barely any. People can't even be bothered to counter-signal anymore, that is how little people think of Kehinde Andrews. That is, of course, until he starts bringing British history into it. A Black Employment Month reminder, because black history isn't enough anymore, that the British Empire was worse than the Nazis. It lasted far longer, killed hundreds of millions of people, and inspired Hitler. They keep trying to use that, but that is a complete misreading of history and what Hitler said. For Make It Plain org, I break down the Empire debate full vid here, and we're obviously going to go through the full video. The clip is just for Twitter, but obviously it's within the full video and I want to cover the whole thing because I'm mad. But you'll notice at the bottom he actually gets ratioed. 207 retweets, most of which are probably quote tweets. Only 375 likes. And bear in mind, we're in an age of Twitter where you can like something and it's private. So people aren't even liking it, knowing that there's no chance of them being bullied for it. And then obviously there are 415 replies. He got ratioed. That is actually quite unheard of for Kehinde Andrews, given that Twitter is an openly left-wing space, even after Elon Musk has taken it over. But as far as I'm concerned, the Blacktivist movement's dead. It's completely died. Their hyperbole didn't cut through. Labour are in charge and trying to, obviously, put in some policies that Blacktivists like, but they're the most unpopular government pretty much ever. They've crashed harder than Liz Truss, kind of unironically. So they can put in a small amount of policy that Kehinde Andrews would want, but they're not going to last. And should Reform and the Tories actually get anywhere, even make a coalition government next Parliament, that stuff will probably be removed. Because if it's not, Reform are going to keep growing, and the Tories don't want that. Anyway, as mentioned before, this is from a full half-an-hour video on YouTube, which we're going to get into right now. Please take it away, Professor Andrews.
It is also Black Employment Month in the UK, and so I figured as an intro we'd do a bit of history. Let's do a bit of black history.
Just out of interest, I decided to Google Black Employment Month because I have literally never heard of this in my life, and apparently nobody else has, because all you get on Google is a load of guides to Black History Month. And then, if you get far enough down, there is a Black Employment Awareness Month in Canada. But if you read closely, you can see it says it is an annual September initiative. It's October at the moment. So this literally looks like something that Kehinde Andrews has just completely made up, expecting it to catch on, and it hasn't, because nobody cares about Kehinde Andrews anymore. We've had years since the Black Lives Matter movement, which made no sense in Britain as it was. They managed to get every footballer to take the knee, bar a couple, and for some reason they thought that cultural power would continue. Well, no, apparently it only took 2 or 3 years for it to be completely decimated. Probably because it was one of the most annoying things known to man, and probably because a lot of people are going into similar fake history that Kehinde Andrews is about to go into. So please do take it away.
With a reminder and a reminder that Black history is just history, and when I give you the example I'm going to give you in a bit, this will hopefully make lots and lots of sense.
Yeah, we've heard the Black history is British history line for years now. For some reason, people started actually believing this. British history does involve some Black history, obviously. Kind of natural when you have a global spanning empire. However, despite the claim that Black history is just normal history, they still demand we have a Black History Month. I think that's why he's trying to change it to Black Employment Month, which is a really weird tactic just to keep it fresh and actually make it look like that claim can stick. However, saying that Black history is just British history ended up with that absolutely moronic, horrible history skit trying to claim that black people have been in Britain basically before anyone else anyway. Which, yeah, turns out basically not true.
But before that, just had to make a slight aside, because I've been telling you for, the last several months, Kemi Badenoch is going to be the next British Prime Minister.
Jeez, that's a hell of a prediction. It is really funny, actually, how with Labour having been in charge, winning what they were saying was, their biggest majority ever. They can do whatever they want. Absolutely everyone, within 3 months of them getting in, was saying, yeah, they're not going to even last 5 years. It'll be Tories again next. And it is interesting how this Blacktivist is not looking forward to the next Prime Minister being the first black Prime Minister that we will ever have. It's amazing how leftists who have been advocating for minorities or women's shortlists, things like that, have completely failed to actually deliver a single woman or black or any other ethnic minority Prime Minister. They've managed it in the devolved parliaments, where basically nobody cares, but when it comes to real power, they're actually really, really bad at trying to get it. Even in the civil service, it's quite a lot of older white gentlemen that are still head of the civil service, and women like Sue Gray get kicked out instantly. It's hilarious how it keeps happening. Basically, the reason for this is, by the way, is that hierarchies in right-wing circles actually test for competence, whereas left-wing circles test for the complete opposite. Basically, you fail upwards more in left-wing societies.
I'm only going to put a caveat on this. It's definitely possible that Keir Starmer don't last all the way to the end. So let's say Kemi Badenoch is going to be the next non-Labour Prime Minister. If you can put a bet on, find a book, you put a bet on this, it's going to happen. She's in the top 2 now of the Tory leadership contest, going to the membership, and I keep getting tweets saying, no way, she's not gonna win. Look what happened last time. They put her, this is different. Kemi is of a different order. Rishi was just brown. He ain't really into the whole anti-wokeness. He ain't really shilling for white supremacy too hard. Like, he'll do it in the background, but he ain't one of them that's come out with all this nonsense. Kemi has laid the foundation. They love Kemi. She's gonna win by a landslide.
It's so funny having the conversations I have had for the past few days that leftist blacktivists, people I would happily call fifth columnists, people who want Britain destroyed, people who, maybe if push comes to shove, there maybe is actually an argument to deport these people. Not that I'm saying I want Kehinde Andrews deported, but it is very funny how it's this type of person who is more than anyone else worried about Kemi Badenoch not getting in because she is a handmaiden for white supremacy. And yet I am being told by the far right instead that she is a fifth columnist and she needs to be deported. Now, personally, I am in favour of Robert Jenrick winning because I think that is going to make a much more suitable and sensible arms race for the right to get decent policy in between Reform and Conservatives. Kemi, I think, is just very good at saying the platitudes, but her record in office tells a different story of wanting to be against mass migration, and actually that's pretty much it. She's been pretty good against the woke, I would say, but Like a lot of other people, I don't fully trust her. However, it is very funny to see that the people that have been at the forefront of the blacktivist, race grifting, Black Lives Matter left are incredibly worried about Kemi getting in, and yet it's the far right who apparently people like Kehinde Andrews are worried about, saying no, she actually needs to be deported because she's exactly the same as you. As I said in the video on Sunday, these people are not to be taken seriously. I just find it very funny that this is his outlook.
Yo, she's the kind of black you want. As I said last podcast, you want anti-blackness? Go find Kemi. All these reform right-wingers, lap that up. And because she's black, she can do it better, right? She can play that dance more than anybody.
This is the type of thing where if a white person was saying it, they would be taken to court, by the way. Effectively, he is calling her a coconut / Uncle Tom without actually saying the words. But it is very funny how he can actually appreciate, whether he admits it or not, that actually he has won. He has got the world that he wanted, where even the right wing have to use ethnic minorities as their people in power to shield them from accusations of racism. That's how powerful the word has become. I don't want to live in a world like that, obviously. And whether Kemi is, just a grifter for right-wing power or whether she's serious about it, doesn't really matter. The world we live in is a world where it's working. It looks like she is going to win. He is correct. And I think there's a good chance she could be the next Prime Minister, probably in a minority government, but still, that is much better than this Labour government that we have right now. Obviously, my preference is to have a Reform majority, but we live in the real world, and realistically, they're probably going to have to be part of the coalition. But it is leaps and bounds better than what we have now.
If nothing tells you that diversity ain't the solution, then that, I don't know what is.
Again, just to lay the point on thick, this is effectively Kehinde Andrews having a bittersweet moment where he realises that his activism has actually resulted in this, and at the same time it has meant that the reaction to it has got worse and worse and worse. Mass deportations is at least somewhat on the cards. Nigel Farage is obviously avoiding using the term, because if he did do it, then Kehinde Andrews would introduce this saying, oh, mass deportation, it's on the cards now. Politicians are openly saying it, we need to fight harder. But, as I keep saying, Farage is smarter than that. He knows that that is an open door for attack, and so he just leaves it closed. And, people on the online right can't seem to appreciate that. More and more people are, actually. But when he initially did it, I couldn't believe what I saw. Anyway, details on that in the video from Sunday.
Today, the thing I wanted to start with and then lead out is there was news about the Chagos Islands. Chagos Islands is a small collection of islands just off Mauritius.
Just for reference on this map, Kehinde Andrews is trying to claim that the Chagos Islands are just off from Mauritius. As you can tell from this map, and I added Madagascar in there to give you the reference that Madagascar is something like 400 miles long there. Yet to say it's just off from Mauritius is pretty disingenuous. It's something like 300 miles away from it. It is, in fact, much closer to the Maldives, as I'm showing on this second map. And yet the Maldives are trying to have absolutely no claim over it, and in fact Mauritius has absolutely no claim over it whatsoever, because the British brought it off Mauritius in a deal in the 1960s, while they were talking about independence. So when they got independence, they never had the Chagos Islands, it was already brought off them, and believe it or not, when you buy islands, you actually cede all claims to them. That's kind of part of the deal. So yeah, this is Kehinde Andrews yet again just lying to try and make the point, oh, we've taken land off Mauritius, that is the point he's going to try and make, and we're not giving it back because we're racist. When the reality is much simpler in that, no, we just bought them, therefore we own them.
There's Mauritius, and then you have about 800 miles, so they really are quite remote. You have the Chagos Islands.
Okay, fair enough. He's not trying to lie. Saying just off, I think he is trying to correct himself there. I will give him some credit there. He actually even over-exaggerated the distance by like double, but either way, yes, they are very remote. Again, you would actually be much more accurate saying they're just off the Maldives, but even that isn't true.
Chagos Islands have now, it's just been, David Lammy just announced that they're going to be returned to Mauritius.
This is the disingenuous part. How can we return the islands to Mauritius when Mauritius never owned them?
Right. I mean, you might want to ask the question, why on earth does Britain have control of the Chagos Islands in the middle of the Indian Ocean?
Because we had this thing called an empire. The reason we held islands like Mauritius and the Chagos Islands, like Cyprus, like the peninsula, Gibraltar, was to effectively have outposts along our trade routes. You have to be pretty historically uneducated to even kind of say this question sarcastically. Oh, why do we have this? Oh, because we had a global empire. It's not difficult.
Miles away, none of here. Weren't we told the British Empire was ended? Turns out it's not the case. British Empire still exists, actually exists, not just like politically, economically exists, actually exists with control over places like Chagos Islands, Gibraltar.
What, all these places that want to still be part of the British Empire? We're actually past the point of having these conversations. The British Empire, if you want to call it that, the Commonwealth as it stands now, holds British overseas territories as British, but as their own distinct colonies. For example, Gibraltar, the Falklands, whatever, they all have their own independent parliaments, their own governments. We just take care of their foreign affairs and their defence. It is a situation that everyone is happy with. This is essentially the "there was someone you forgot to ask for consent" meme, where Kehinde Andrews is Jesus.
Bermuda, there's like 15 other places around the world that Britain actually controls, right?
Again, no. This is why there's an issue with the Falklands at the moment, where Ed Miliband is doing his best to completely decarbonise the energy sector by 2030, and the Falklands can literally just ignore him and go on one of the biggest offshore drilling operations that the planet has ever seen, and Britain can do absolutely nothing to stop it. To say Britain controls them is just disingenuous.
But now they've been returned. There was a bit of dispute, return of the Chagos Islands. Robert Jenrick, who is opposition to Kemi in the Tory leadership context, not happy, even though, by the way, Conservatives actually started to negotiate this deal previously.
It's a bit disingenuous yet again. The reason for starting these talks was to effectively release international pressure, because China, Russia, a load of other people that hate Britain are going out of their way to effectively delegitimise Britain on the world stage, and this is a way to do it, and it's a pathetic way to do it. But it's better just to release the pressure in some way, so that's why they started talks. As it has turned out, when David Cameron got in, he actually just blocked the whole thing, and the talk there were like 17 rounds of talks or something, maybe not that many, to effectively say in the end, yeah, you're not having them. This is all just for show. So saying the Tories started it, okay, they should have expected to lose power and therefore shut these talks down. That's about the fairest argument you can say, but to say, oh, the Tories wanted this as well, just not true.
He's not happy, frothing at the mouth. The right-wingers are frothing at the mouth because, what did they say? They said that, I'm trying to get the quote, I got it up. Jenrick used to be immigration minister for that racist government, tells you all you need to know about this dude.
Ah yes, that government that oversaw the largest influx of non-white people into the country ever. Yeah, that racist government. Kehinde Andrews is not to be taken seriously. We are making this video to laugh at him.
It said, whose interests does he think he serves? Talking about David Lammy. Those are the global diplomatic elite or of the British people and our national interest. Apparently it's in our national interest to keep hold of these islands.
Well, yeah, as I said before, it's incredibly strategic. It's our only base in the entirety of the Indian Ocean, and it is incredibly useful because we have a US naval base there that they would very much like to keep there. Giving it away, we are giving away even more in foreign aid to Mauritius, who again have no actual claim on the islands. We will also have to be paying rent for the US naval base, which is just absurd because we are literally maintaining it for free now. Effectively, everything about this deal is just nonsense, and the only thing that Kehinde Andrews can say here is that, you see, this is just a white supremacist way of thinking. Not really. It's a politically realistic way of thinking. If that's white supremacy, so be it.
And the reason why is because there's a military base on the islands, US, UK military base, and they didn't want to give up the military base. China might get the military base. This does also tell you something about British Empire. Still there. The military base is still there.
I mean, the military base is mainly a US one. It's technically a joint US-UK one, but it is majority used by the US. I mean, it's a pretty bad way of having a British Empire if the military presence there is majority American.
And guess what's still there after the Chagos Islands have been returned? The military base.
Yeah, but we're having to pay rent for it now, which is God knows how much a year. It's not exactly good politics to own an island and then make the decision that we should give them away and then pay for the pleasure of that. It's just moronic.
So actually, this is perfect. If you want the history of the British Empire and the decline of the British Empire, this is what happened.
God, don't sound too excited to gloat over British decline.
And we had this because last week on the pod, I was drawing this contrast between Portugal. How does Portugal get away with being such a terrible? I mean, Portugal's OG slavery, colonialism. Portugal into the 70s was like armed struggle, really trying to oppress. They had to have like actual armed, like military armed struggle with Portuguese troops in Angola, in Mozambique, in Cape Verde, in Guinea-Bissau. Anyway, they were Portuguese. They didn't go. They didn't just go. They went violently. So it's really strange that Portugal's kind of missed out on a lot of the anti-colonial feeling, the racist feeling.
I want you to bear in mind that I have mainly called this video what I called it because of a clip that is coming up somewhat soon. But yeah, I do as well find it pretty amazing that out of all countries that were involved in the transatlantic slave trade, because that's all Kehinde Andrews really thinks empire was, just the transatlantic slave trade, despite the fact that we still had an empire for a century after we literally destroyed it. He's right, it is interesting that Britain seems to get all of this nonsense, despite the fact that Spain had an empire with slavery, Portugal had an empire with slavery, the Dutch had an empire with slavery. Yet the British get most of the blame for it, for one, being one of the last empires involved in the slave trade, and then two, making it impossible for everyone else to have a slave trade. And yet we are the worst guys out of all of it. The main reason is because we had the biggest empire. That's the main reason that they hate us. Literally, they hate us because they ain't us.
But whereas Britain, on the other side, there was definitely armed struggle against Britain, and there was resistance.
Yeah, not as much though. You've got Rorke's Drift and the Zulus and all that, sure. The reason the Brits, you don't see as much armed conflict against them is because effectively the way the British Empire worked was, I've heard it described as effectively we just fell into having an empire, because we mainly did it through economic means. Our colonialism was majority done through trade, and the best way to do trade is to have good relations with the locals. The times we did get militaristic, let's say, it was basically to stop bandits. Sudan effectively became a colonised country because they were just bandits who were going outside their borders and raiding Britain, the British colonies. So the British just said, okay, went in there, destroyed the bandits, and then effectively made it another colony. That's why Kehinde's kind of pulling this face, saying, yeah, there was some armed uprising, but not as much as there was against the Portuguese, because our colonisation was done majority through trade.
Kenya, with the Mau Mau uprising, Zimbabwe, obviously there was armed struggle. But generally, what Britain does is what they did in the Chagos Islands. There's some resistance, there's some pushback, and then they leave. They go, okay, we're gone.
I mean, nobody lives there, so I don't know who's doing that. Obviously, there were some native Chagos Islanders who, effectively, their ethnogenesis was around the 19th century. They were creating the culture when they were slaves under the French. British take over, end slavery. They're not slaves anymore, but they still work on the coconut plantations. And then they get removed in the 60s to make way for this big military base. And, there's no doubt that that was handled badly. I'm not going to say that we handled it well. They ended up having to move to either Seychelles or over to Mauritius, or some came over to Britain as well. The ones that came over to Britain were generally treated the best, from what I understand. And now when it comes to this decision, the Chagos Islanders are not even being asked. They are just going through with selling them off, not even selling them off, paying to get rid of them because international laws say so. It's hardly decolonisation. It's much closer to a hostile takeover that's being allowed because we have completely weak leaders and foreign secretary.
India happened, Nigeria, Ghana, Caribbean, they're gone. They're just kind of, go ahead, go.
Yeah, these are better examples of decolonisation. Again, we left these countries and gave them independence more because it was unaffordable at this point, thanks to 2 world wars which we won.
Well, and this was not a compliment. When I was saying this contrast, violently won't let go, versus let's just sit back and we'll withdraw.
It's not a compliment. What would you rather that it was done on a pile of hundreds of thousands of dead bodies? What in your mind would be complementary for decolonisation? How is just granting independence not good? That's what I mean. With Kehinde Andrews, it literally doesn't matter what we do. It will always be bad because he is a grifter. All he wants is to extract as much as he can out of the system. Hence, as he said in the podcast I referenced before, for years he's been trying to get fired as a professor because if he can get a severance package. And he makes more as a grifter writing all these nonsense books and joining all these nonsense podcasts. But obviously because he's still a professor, he still has to work at the University of Birmingham and he clearly doesn't want to. The man is just a complete and utter dishonest actor. As I say, we're here to point out that he has no consistent beliefs and laugh at that fact.
That wasn't a compliment to Britain. That doesn't make Britain any better, because this is what Britain tends to do in their empire.
Amazing. Britain didn't kill hundreds of thousands of people during decolonisation. They're no better than the people that did. Just absolute nonsense.
They just tended to pretend to withdraw, but actually everything they wanted to keep, they kept.
Well, yeah. Typically with Gibraltar and all that, they wanted to stay as part of a British overseas territory. Same with Malta, but Malta we still decolonised because people that wanted Malta to be independent claimed that the vote out was too low. It was 60%, by the way. So the powers that be forced them to be independent anyway. Now, Chagos is a bit unique in this case. Obviously, we brought them off Mauritius when it was still part of the empire. Therefore, Mauritius, when they went independent, ceded all claims to it. Therefore, it is ours. There's no way to return it to Mauritius. And everyone understands this and thinks it's a bad idea to give it to Mauritius. And even then, as I say, there are Chagos Islanders who are against giving it to Mauritius, and yet they're given no time of day. Because at the end of the day, Kehinde Andrews doesn't care about these people or anything like that. All he wants is for Britain's position to be weaker. Which just ceding territory and paying for the pleasure is definitely weakening British position.
Chagos Islands is a perfect example. The only reason that the Britain wanted Chagos Island was their base. They're not making any money off it. It wasn't profitable. It was the base.
Yeah, amazingly, again, Kehinde Andrews is a postmodern neo-Marxist, hence he was a massive fan of Black Lives Matter. And he doesn't seem to realise that actually it is still within our interest to have a military base there. It doesn't have to make us money. That is just a ridiculous thing to say.
And guess what? They still have the base. And this is what happens. Nigeria, Ghana, Jamaica, they leave, but they keep what they want. They keep the economic influence. They keep the money flow. They keep the industry. They keep taking. And so it still remains intact.
So when it comes to the Chagos Islands, there's absolutely no economic benefit to it, as you have just said. You have clearly just said that. You just want it there for the base. Okay, well, when we go, believe it or not, the base is going to go down once the lease is done. Things can obviously change in 99 years, but effectively, if we were going to give it back to them fully, we take the base down and basically make it impossible to make another. Again, there's no economic reason to do this, and then you've just gone into another tirade of, oh, Britain will try and keep all the stuff that they can to keep the money flowing. No, that's not true. The empire is a net negative. Do you really think that we defended the Falkland Islands because it's making us billions a year? No, their main export is sheep. There's like 500,000 sheep on the islands. It's not in our economic interest at all. No, the reason we fought for the Falkland Islands and the reason we still keep Gibraltar is because it's our borders. It's our sovereign territory and the people living there agree with it. There's literally nothing more to it than that. That is the only reason you should fight, by the way. Because your land is sovereign and the way you keep it sovereign is by fighting for it. Ideology within it, whether it's communist, fascist, liberal, neoliberal, postmodern neo-Marxist, whatever, it doesn't matter. You are of that sovereign land, you defend it.
Right. And that's the thing about the British Empire, it still remains intact. It may not be politically there, you may not own it, but the things they want, they still have.
What, these countries that are actually costing us money? You know, it's not like Gibraltar's this Singapore in the Mediterranean. You know, it's not like they're making us absolutely billions and, you know, effectively funneling money from them to feed hungry people in the north or anything like that. No, it's absolute nonsense. We have them because they're ours and the people there want to remain part of the British overseas territories. We don't live in the 1940s where there are all these independence movements. We don't live in that time anymore. We live in the Monday where generally we've kind of landed at a point where every colony we have wants to remain a British colony. We've held them for, 200 to at least 300 years, mainly from other Europeans, by the way. There is no interest there to become independent or become of another country. Therefore, they stay as ours. It's not difficult.
That's far more insidious in many ways. That's far more. That's the Malcolm talks about the wolf and the fox. The wolf was Portugal, arms, like troops. We want to keep this place. Britain was the fox. Bit of resistance. We'll make it feel like you're independent, but you're not independent at all. And that's what we have with the Chagos Islands.
Yeah, again, Chagos Islands pretty unique in that way. We did deport everyone from the island to make the military base. I don't think at any point, though, did we even pretend that they had independence. So it's hardly being fox-like. And then all of the other overseas territories we have, Gibraltar, Falklands, for example. Again, the only way we play a role in how their government is run is that if they have foreign affairs issues or something like that, it goes to the Foreign Office. And if they need defending, like the Falklands did, we send a task force to defend them. This really isn't difficult, and again, you're being very disingenuous about all this, like embarrassingly so.
So, the thing around the element of history I wanted to point out here was to talk about the British Empire, because we really don't talk about the British Empire enough. When we do talk about the British Empire, we tend to talk about it in these soft tones, and it tends to be debates. I mean, I've been in a number of these debates about the British Empire.
Yeah, and I'm kind of at a point where the debates are, as it turns out, are pretty pointless. Because the people that want to say, oh, it was clearly bad for everyone and it was only bad, are simply there effectively to get reparations. If it's Indians, they say we owe them something like £72 trillion or something ridiculous. If it's black people, it's, oh, you enslaved my ancestors, therefore you owe me money. Forgetting the fact that without Britain they would, there's every chance they'd still be enslaved. But that's a different conversation altogether. Was it entirely good? Was it entirely bad? No, obviously not. Like most things throughout history, there was obviously good and bads. If there's one thing that you can say, it's certainly that it influenced the modern world to a massive degree. And a lot of people seem to prefer modernity to returning, as much as the online circles would like you to think differently there. But yeah, given that modernity is effectively a result of the British Empire, at least in a large part, and people seem to prefer it, yeah, I'd say overall it was probably pretty good.
There's so many of these empire apologists, people like, it's a terrible book. I mean, I call it a book. It's basically this propaganda screed by Niall Ferguson. I don't know, whatever the guy's name is. I mean, the book was so bad, I was listening to the book and almost drove off the road laughing because it was so stupid. Like, you think this book is a really popular book called, I think it's called Empire. I wouldn't say it's called Empire. And you think it must have must be some sense to it because it's so popular. Oh my days, you don't need sense of these books. Psychosis all the way.
So the book by Niall Ferguson is called Empire, How Britain Made the Modern World. I have read this book. It was recommended to me by one of my friends who did history. And it is probably the fairest evaluation and historical analysis of the empire that I have ever read. It's just full of facts is the only way I can put it. To say that it was propaganda, I think, is a bit mad. And the main reason Kehinde Andrews is saying that this is propaganda is effectively because it doesn't go on about slavery enough. Slavery comes up a few times in the book, but Niall Ferguson is clearly trying to give you a full breadth and depth of the British Empire, how it worked and why it came about. And slavery is just not mainly on the agenda. Unlike all the trade links and mercantilist businessmen going about making these colonies for profit, obviously, making trade routes, all that sort of stuff. And that's basically why Kehinde Andrews is annoyed at this book and calls it propaganda, basically because he thinks it omits slavery too much, even though it goes into it. Anyway, if you're interested, I recommend you buy this book. It's where most of my knowledge of the empire comes from.
Making these arguments that Britain was wonderful, Britain was great, it wasn't the Britain of trains, absolute nonsense, right? Britain was not, the British Empire was a terrible force for bad in the world.
Yeah, it's not what the book does at all. The book is not particularly making a moral argument one way or the other. Again, this is Kehinde's problem with the book. It's not saying outright that the British Empire was bad, therefore it's propaganda. Well, yeah, big irony, I know.
Chagos Islands story is look at actually what happened in the Chagos Islands. 1780s, Britain gets involved, 1790s, and they start to the first inhabitants. They say the first inhabitants, they probably killed a few people because that tends to what happens.
The first inhabitants were French. The first inhabitants of the Chagos Islands were French. They were a completely barren island before then. Not barren, that's not the right word. Uninhabited island by that point. Portuguese discovered it, named it. French Empire then colonised it, put coconut plantations there, brought a load of slaves over from Africa. They are the people that then become the Chagos Islanders. So first inhabitants isn't technically correct, but I am fine to call them natives.
When they take over islands, first it's the Portuguese. Portuguese always involved. Hey, hey.
Yeah, it's one of the few times they colonised somewhere without having to kill people, because there was literally no one there to kill. They just found them, named them, went home.
Britain takes over, and it's slavery. They use it for plantation. They take enslaved Africans from the mainland, and it's plantation labor, right? There was slavery on the African continent.
I mean, again, this is pretty disingenuous. Once again, the French were the people to first inhabit it. They were the ones that established the coconut plantations and brought slaves over. Yes, Britain then took over in 1814, carried on using slavery up until 1830 to 1840. That's when they obviously made slavery illegal and started freeing all the slaves. They were freed on the island and obviously had to be paid for their labour and effectively be free people. Now obviously, should we have done slavery in the past? Yeah, sure, by modern sensibilities, obviously slavery is bad, we shouldn't have done it. Was this what people thought in 1814? Some people in London, well, a lot of people in London, yeah, sure. That was then spread out across the entire world. Thank you, British Empire, for that, I suppose. But if the island stayed French, guess who it would have been who came over to free those slaves? It wouldn't have been the French.
Europeans wanted slavery much more broadly on the African continent, but it was our resistance that stopped that. Our resistance that said you cannot have slavery on the African continent.
Bruh. It's just complete ahistorical nonsense. There were tribes that the Europeans were trading with for slaves, saying, can you please not make slavery illegal? This is basically how we make all our money. Like, to say it was African resistance against the Europeans that ended the slave trade is absolute ahistorical nonsense. Obviously, yeah, there will have been resistance to slavery if you're on the losing side, obviously. But to say generally, yeah, that there was a massive push against slavery from the Africans, it's like, nah, a bit more complicated than that. The whole meme of white people going into the depths of Africa to capture unsuspecting black people to bring them back for slaves on these ships, it was rare. I'm not saying it didn't happen, it was rare. It was much easier just to say to these African chiefs, oh, you want a war and have all these slaves? Yeah, we'll take them off your hands. I can't believe he's trying to claim this. Complete disingenuous moron. This guy's a liar, by the way. He must know it's not true. The man studies black history.
But on these islands, so Cape Verde is another example where Portuguese enslaved people on the islands. Chagos Islands in Mauritius, they could enslave people because it's a small, it's 800 miles away from the mainland, so the resistance can't really reach that far.
Well, I mean, not too sure about Mauritius, but when it comes to Chagos, there's no one there to resist. Again, it wasn't local. Well, it eventually ended up being locals enslaved because they made a new ethnicity of these islanders, but originally it will have been people from the mainland, yes. Again, to make it clear, slavery bad, but if we're going to talk about history here, let's keep to the facts.
So, Chagos Islands is slavery, right? Slave labour. Slave labour that goes on until 1840. Remember, the British slavery in the British Empire is supposed to end in 1834. That's nonsense because they do what...
Yeah, it's supposed to end in 1834. It then took decades to actually end it. Like, it's not an overnight process. And it's hard to get details on exactly why it took so long. Should it have been done when it was abolished everywhere else? Yes, obviously. Why it wasn't done, though, till 6 years later, I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out and see if the slavers were punished as they should be. If they weren't, it's like 200 years ago. What are we supposed to do?
They want to, they want to try and keep using plantation labour. Not that profitable for the UK. So it stays a colony. People there, a few thousand people live there. And then in the 60s, 70s, guess what they decide? They decide they want to put a military base there. US and the UK says we want a military base on the Chagos Islands. But guess what they do? They just get rid of the people. They kick out 2,000 to 3,000 people, just get taken off the land.
And yeah, I agree. It wasn't dealt with the best. They were effectively told you need to leave the island at your own expense. I am totally on board with, even now, it's within living memory, giving the people who were forced to leave reparations for that. I think it's perfectly reasonable. I don't see how you can kick someone off an island, no matter how economically backwatery it is. If they are forced off what they consider to be their homelands, they obviously should have some compensation for that. They weren't given compensation at the time. I think it's fair to give people who can prove that they were forced off the islands reparations. I think that's just fair. Basically what I'm saying is that it's took Kehinde about 10 minutes, but he has finally come up with a fair point that he doesn't have to be disingenuous about. But he's been so disingenuous before this, I don't blame you if you even think at this point, oh, forget him, he's probably lying again. But no, he's being fair here.
You've got to go somewhere else. Some end up in Britain, some end up in Mauritius. They just evacuated people. They said, bye, God, time to go. See ya. This has been a massive contention of people wanting to go back, who wanted to go back to the islands, people wanting to go back to their homeland, etc., etc., etc. And this has wrangled on for years and years and years and years and years. And now finally, it made this decision. We're going to step back. We're British, aren't we wonderful? Blah, 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 blah. We'll do it in a nice, polite way. I mean, this is central. This is the idea that there's somehow something positive that people could take out of this. Insane.
What do you mean something positive to take out of this? Everyone thinks this is stupid. It's one of the most unpopular decisions they've made. People think it's moronic because the Chagos Islanders have not been consulted on this at all. Other people think it's stupid because why are we giving the islands away and paying for the pleasure? And then there's the political realist side of it of having a military base there for our use is obviously a good thing. It's the only one we have in the Indian Ocean. Worldwide geopolitical tensions have literally not been higher since the fall of the Berlin Wall. But you don't care about that. You just care about moving your grift on and getting free money for it. So I'm not surprised that you're having to lie about the reaction to this. Nobody thinks this is good. The Chagos Islanders absolutely hate Mauritius, by the way, because they mistreat the Chagos Islanders that are living on Mauritius. So again, good one.
The idea that the right wing are mad about this, oh, we're giving up the empire, no, 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 no. You could just laugh at it and say, well, actually, look, this just shows that Britain's influence is gone. This just shows what a nonsense sense we are now. This just shows the... But actually, no, we shouldn't do that. Again, we seem to look at empire, decline of empire in the wrong way.
What the hell are you talking about here? Nobody is invoking the empire to keep it. What they are invoking is that it is our sovereign land, but completely justifiably. Now, you can have critiques of the way that we expelled people from the islands. Sure, I have my own criticisms of it. To say that anyone is saying we should keep it because empire is just ridiculous. That at best is a meme.
British Empire declined, but still kept the power. Chagos Islands is a perfect example.
Again, we bought them perfectly legitimately.
And when we think about the British Empire, we have to think about the British Empire in much more serious ways, right? The British Empire was not just some benign thing. It was not just some good and bad thing, right? It was not just something we can just, Interestingly, we've gone from thinking about the empire historically was taught, like early on, it was taught as though the British Empire was positive, was great, was wonderful. Da, 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 da. Now, then it was not talked about. Now we're kind of in this ambivalent, is it not?
Well, we're not though, are we? Again, I could just cite my experience at school. The British Empire was brought up once. It was to talk about slavery. That was it. The British Empire has so much more of a rich history than that, and that is effectively what it boiled down to in my education. If it's talked about, it's to bring up the bad part. If anything, it's pretty impressive that the only bad part they could bring up was slavery, and they had to ignore literally all the rest of it. Just embarrassing. It is a complete curriculum disaster. I don't blame my school. My school did what they could with it, but there is no interest in teaching proper history. There is only interest in teaching propaganda. A great recent example, I've recently read a book on Gladstone and Disraeli. It was a very good book. It gave me a decent education. When I mentioned it to my dad, he said, oh, I remember learning that in history about Gladstone and Disraeli. And all I could say back was, I'd literally never heard of them until I was like 21. We just do not hear about these people. Nobody could name a prime minister before Churchill. So to try and say that even now, if we do teach about empire, it's like, oh, is it good, is it bad? No. It is purely taught as bad. It's just ridiculous to say otherwise.
I'll go back to Ferguson's book. Ferguson makes this argument that British Empire, there were some bad things happened, but generally good. Railways, industry, and really importantly, he says the British Empire is the empire that defeated the Nazis. So when the Nazis came up, the worst empire, the terrible people in history came up.
I'd say that's a pretty fair point, my dude. It doesn't just say that we stopped the Nazis because of the empire. He actually brings up that we sacrificed the empire to stop the Nazis. I mean, I'm not being funny, but that is obviously something that should be appreciated. And I kind of get why a lot of people on the online right Some go too far and say Hitler was actually the good guy of the war. That's obviously wrong. Hitler was the bad guy of the war. But I can understand why they say, well, none of it was appreciated, so he basically sacrificed the empire for nothing, which is nowhere near as the point where I'd go. But when you hear things like this, you start to kind of understand it. Because these grifters who make a lot of money, go on all these podcasts, these chat shows, make all their money from denigrating Britain, they unironically say things like this.
The British Empire defeated the Nazis, and so therefore any bad things that it did really don't matter because, got rid of the Nazis, so it must be good. Right? I mean, it was the British Empire that did it. And it is so stupid.
I mean, just to make it clear, he's trying to be hyperbolic and say, when Neil Ferguson says, the British Empire did what they could, everything they could, sacrifice themselves to defeat the Nazis, therefore there can be no criticisms of the Empire ever. That's not what he's saying. He is saying that generally that is seen overall throughout its history as a good thing. It is a good thing that the British stopped the Nazis. A warmongering expansionist power that was putting people in camps because they were not racially pure enough. I think it's fair to say that is worse than what the British Empire were doing. I'd say stopping possibly the most evil regime on the planet, it can generally be seen as a good thing.
The piece of history that I was taking a long time to get to because I wanted to kind of lay out the Chagos Islands that I wanted to talk about was this, that we actually, when we think about the British Empire, we have to think about, I was on Good Morning Britain years ago, and Piers Morgan couldn't understand what I said to him. The British Empire was worse than the Nazis.
Yeah, so it's taken 45 minutes, but we finally got to the part that he decided to put on Twitter. Yeah, unironically, Kehinde Andrews is here saying that the British Empire wasn't worse than the Nazis, which is nothing short of one of the most ridiculous things I think anyone can ever say. I just want to say at this point, Horseshoe vindicated once again. I referred to them before. Parts of the online right saying Hitler was the good guy practically are in agreement with Kehinde Andrews here. Now, it's for completely different reasons. Kehinde Andrews' reasoning is basically going to be, well, the British did more to oppress black people in their history than the Nazis. Laws that were originally intended just to be targeted at Jews to make their lives as difficult as possible in Nazi Germany were eventually applied, not actually long after they were first implemented to Jews, to apply to Romani gypsies and black people. Naturally, they were considered second-class citizens, some were killed, many were spat at and abused in the streets, some were forcibly sterilised, and then obviously as the war went on, they would end up in the concentration camps. Now, basically what I'm saying is putting it into perspective. The reason that Kehinde Andrews is saying this is because the Germans didn't have a world-spanning empire. And because they didn't have a world-spanning empire, they weren't able to go over the globe and try and implement these laws that they were implementing in Germany. Now, what the British did was implement let's free all the slaves laws, and did that all over the world. And then, again, sacrificed themselves to beat the Nazi horror. Now, I don't care which way you spin that. I am not saying the British Empire was perfect by any means. You can even say the Empire was more bad than good at this point. If you are saying the Nazis were better than the British Empire, you need to be institutionalised, literally sectioned. I don't think your brain is working as it should if that is what you say. The thing is that he doesn't mean this earnestly. He effectively, Kehinde Andrews is doing this to get a reaction, which is working out of me, sure. But clearly his grift isn't working anymore. As I say, on Twitter, not even 1,000 likes? Not even 500 likes. Getting ratioed. People aren't buying his nonsense anymore. Black Lives Matter movement is over. I think we should be really happy about that. This is a white pill. He is trying to do the same tactics he was partaking in 4 years ago and making money off it. And it's simply not working as well as it used to. That is a good thing.
The British Empire was worse than the Nazis. That is fundamentally, objectively true.
Fundamentally, objectively true. Wow. Hell of a claim. Yeah, I can see there's a reason you're a Black Studies professor and not a history professor. I can see why your grift isn't working anymore. You're going a little too far here, my dude.
I wasn't just trying to put it out there to be, there was this objective reality. Right? That's how we think about the British Empire. The British Empire was awful. The Nazis did some great things, right? They built roads, the Autobahn. Ooh, great. First motorway.
Yeah, the whole they built the British built industry in these colonies. Like it's not the first thing people go to. Typically, the first thing people go to is beyond that. Rule of law, the parliamentary system. You know, most of our colonies still use the parliamentary system. It just works that well. The ones that got rid of it, Zimbabwe, how well's that gone? And again, even when it comes to the Nazis, where are they building all these things? In Germany, for Germans. You know, they literally put laws in to forcibly make you second-class citizens. The British Empire very much tried their best to do the opposite. To say if you are a British citizen, it has quite little to do with your genetics, an awful lot to do with your character, and if you are a subject of the crown, you should be treated as such, the same as your fellow countrymen. But yeah, man, that idea is way worse than what the Nazis did. Again, his whole cope is going to be, the Nazis only did this in Germany, Britain did it all over the world. Like, I'm sorry that we were better than them at making an empire, I guess, but we didn't then use it to oppress people forever. The British project was to make the world a better place, and if you don't think it did, fair enough, you can have that opinion. If you think the Nazis were spreading Nazism and the Third Reich to make the world a better place for everyone, I don't know what to tell you. Again, you should be sectioned.
What are we going to celebrate? We celebrate the Nazis? Like, Nazi propaganda, media, the way that things, that's Goebbels, man. Like, what, we supposed to celebrate the Nazis now?
What? What are you... No, you're the one that said the Nazis were better. What are you on about? How's he turned this around? He openly said the Nazis are better than the British Empire, and then is somehow trying to say, because some people argue that putting trains and better infrastructure in India meant that the British Empire was good, that means we have to think the Nazi Empire was good, because they also did infrastructure projects. Like, again, not many people actually have that as their go-to answer for why the British Empire was good. And if they do, they're just people that aren't really educated on the subject and just think, British Empire, yeah, I've heard that's good. Why? Don't really know. Trains, I guess. This is effectively like Kehinde Andrews being a professor, looking at the guy down the pub who, you know, just lives his life and drinks and knows Britain had a good empire, and then effectively trying to put him on the same level as him, which isn't fair. If Kehinde Andrews has ever talked to Neil Ferguson, I would love to hear it, because he would just get decimated if he actually tried to argue against someone that is frankly just better than him and a more professional academic. Again, he's doing the thing that the leftists claim the right do all the time, which is punch down. You know, they say they punch down because, oh, white people punching down on black people, where it's just projection. This is Kehinde Andrews punching down on people who are in his comments, just finding what he says to be distasteful and clearly not having the full education on the reality of the British Empire. And that's how his grift went for ages. It's just pathetic.
The supposedly progress that the British Empire may have helped to bring into the world on the backs of hundreds of millions of black and brown people does not make it a novel good.
I mean, again, the British Empire only really became majorly profitable post the Napoleonic Wars, because we weren't constantly paying for wars after that. What happened after we finished the Napoleonic Wars? Wow, we ended slavery. We did it at a point where it was actually becoming more profitable because we were practically the only empire left. To then say we built the empire on the backs of black and brown people, again... Yeah, there was slavery, plantations, all that in the olden days, back in the 1700s. Bad, obviously, but I'm not being funny. If you think the whole of the British Empire was just slavery to get black and brown people to places to force them to work and make this infrastructure, I don't know what to tell you. Most slaves were used on plantations. Infrastructure massively started being built beyond that. You know, trains weren't about till the 1800s, after slavery was abolished. They were paid workers after that point. It's just a complete disingenuous reading of history. Again, was the British Empire perfect? No, obviously not. But if you're pretending that slavery was its main thing, and that slavery was basically not abolished until the British Empire declined, you're just a moron. It's been abolished for 200 years. What more do you want?
This idea, we have to understand worse than Nazis. Why do I say that? And why is it objectively true? So, it's very, very, very clear.
My god, here we go. Here comes the Nazi apologia from the leftist. I've said it for a while, Nazis are left-wing, I'm telling you. They're basically socialists.
British Empire lasts for far longer. We're talking century. British Empire, you could trace it back.
I knew it. I knew that was going to be his reason. Britain was better at making empires. That was it. That's his only reason. He conceded, by the way, that the only reason that the Nazis weren't able to make an empire was because the British Empire sacrificed itself for it. This is how unbelievably disingenuous he's being right now. He would probably concede that the Nazis would have been worse if they had an empire as big as Britain's, but they say, oh, but they didn't. Yeah, why didn't they have a big empire, Kehinde? Why didn't they have a big empire?
Slavery, right? Slavery. If you go all the way back to slavery, that starts in England gets involved in slavery in the 16th century, right? First slave ship sent out by Queen Elizabeth, slave ship Jesus. That's not a joke, it's actually true.
Yep, correct. This is true. Again, I don't know why he's making the assumption that if the Nazis had an empire in 1562, they also wouldn't be involved in this. It's the point I keep bringing up. Having a go at people in the 16th century for being slavers is effectively like having a go at them for not using laptops to charter their voyages or help with their battle strategies. It's because just the idea of it didn't exist. You know, you probably could make an argument that, oh, in England, they didn't have slavery. It was outlawed by William the Conqueror. Yeah, it was only applied to Englishmen. As far as they were concerned with the rest of the planet, they were probably fair game. Now, is that a good moral thing? No, obviously not. But I frankly am going to judge them by the morals of the time. Why did they do this thing? Because they didn't see it as immoral. You know, that sort of thing was discovered later.
So if you take it from there and say, actually, what empire expansion out, starting to build, starting to then colonize is like 17th into the 17th century. Height is the 18th century. Into the 19th century, 20th century. So actually, height of the actual formal empire probably the 19th century.
I mean, again, I love doing this. Like, why would you not just have the Giga Chad image on top of this? Yeah, we owned like a third of the planet. Like, it just sounds impressive. People are going to meme on you when you say this, and then in the same video say, oh, the Nazis were better than them. Why were the Nazis better than us? Oh, because they got absolutely wrecked by us and couldn't make an empire as big as ours. But yeah, of course I'm putting the Giga Chad image. That's a good thing.
20th century decline. 21st century, you could say, still carrying on, but let's just cap it at 60s, 70s, 80s. You cap it at the 60s, 70s, 80s, where you have most of the empire has formally declined.
Yeah, fine. That's when the last few of our overseas territories were demanding independence. What do we do? Give it them. Again, it's probably a bad thing that we're just doing that. I don't know what more he wants than that, but whatever.
That's hundreds of years of history, right? That includes some of the worst atrocities ever committed. Slavery. Just take slavery. Royal African Company, the monopoly company, the first monopoly company that's of the British Crown, is the company that enslaved the most Africans of all companies, right?
I don't know how true that is, actually. I mean, it is perfectly believable, but I do know that the Portuguese sent more slaves over than the British, so I would have just assumed that the Portuguese monopoly company actually enslaved more people, or transported more slaves over the Atlantic. But I mean, yeah, like that's not a defense of Britain's slave trade, by the way. However, again, it's hard to kind of disassociate from what he's saying here with, oh, by the way, this is like worse than what the Nazis did. When again, what was the reason the Nazis couldn't do more? Oh, it was the British literally stopping them, along obviously with the Soviets.
At the height of the slave trade, Britain was the biggest slaving nation, right? I mean, slavery is in itself a genocide. I mean, if you take slavery broadly speaking, not just Britain, but slavery broadly speaking, is responsible for the deaths of anywhere between, and estimates are difficult, but anywhere between 20 and 100 million. I
mean, are we going to have to be very accurate with our language here? I would argue it depends entirely how the slaves are treated. Now, the Ottoman Empire, the way they treated slaves, I'm happy to call that a genocide. They would castrate the males, they would kill black babies, in quite gruesome ways, by the way. We're talking throwing them at walls, things like that. And when it comes to the British treatment of slaves, it is by no means perfect. They're slaves, for God's sake. There was not, if there were recordings of this, they were punished, by the way, but there were not recordings of killing all these people. Obviously, travelling over the Atlantic in the crowded ships that they had, obviously horrific, obviously deaths happened there, obviously I'm against all this. But again, if we're comparing things, I'd argue throwing black people in concentration camps literally to die is much more applicable of the word genocide than the way the British were involved in the slave trade. It's not a defence of it, but I'm not being funny. I'm in a video replying to someone who says the Nazis were better than the British. Like, I'm not being funny. I feel pretty comfortable saying these things because there is just no way you can take this, call me racist, and then keep a straight face while at the same time you're genuinely, unironically trying to play apology for the Nazis. It's just a crazy thing to do.
Anyway, between could be that, could be more than that. We don't know, right? And that's just actual deaths. Don't take into account. You have to take into account. One of the things to take into account with when we say impact is people who would have been alive had the empire had it not happened. So slavery doesn't happen. You're talking. It's way more than 100 million. You can't even count that, right? Slavery decimated Africa's population.
Well, I mean, yeah, the British ended up agreeing and ended up freeing them all in Sierra Leone. It's a story I like to bring up, but at Victoria's, I think it was Diamond Jubilee in one of the Caribbean islands, I can't exactly remember which one, but the black population there that was obviously freed slaves did their own celebration in front of the town hall of their own cultural dances and things like that. Like, these things are obviously bad. You know, are they worse than what the Nazis would? Again, what he's bringing up here is, oh, by the way, these are just deaths that actually happened. Like, there'd be like 5 trillion if we take into account all these theoretical things. I was like, oh, if we're bringing in theoretical things, then yeah, I'm definitely going to bring in the theoretical Nazi global empire. My God, how do you think Africa would look after that?
That African population has not actually recovered. And Britain is a major contributor to that. One of the most contributors to that. So,
yes, and then they were the only contribution to stopping that. Amazing. What did the Nazis do to stop it? Oh, they threw black people in concentration camps. Amazing.
So, this is slavery alone. Slavery alone is a 300 years thing, which Britain was one of the key drivers in.
Again, he brought up hypothetical deaths before that probably happened because the slave trade happened, and then, oh, how many people had been born if these people weren't forced from their homes, whatever. Like, yeah, okay, if we're going into that hypothetical. If Britain never decided that slavery was bad and the transatlantic slave trade was still going on today, how do you think the numbers would be then? You know, for being this disingenuous, we saved tens of trillions of lives by stopping slavery. It's all so one-sided. Oh, let's see how things have gone. Oh, well, we don't care that they stopped slavery. They should have known that way in advance anyway. Oh, well, no one else did, so why is Britain being blamed for that? Oh, well, also, let's go into hypothetical mode. 10 trillion black people died because of Britain, because they were never born, because they ripped black families apart and things like that. Okay. Hang on a second. What would the world look like if Britain never stopped slavery? Are you going to answer that question?
It's worse than the 6-year period. 6-year period of the war and the Holocaust, but to go back for the Nazis, 13, 15, let's say 15 years.
Britain had a 300-year spanning empire, therefore by default they were worse than the Nazis. That shows an awful lot of success. Again, ex-slaves at the time of being released were incredibly thankful to the empire. It seems to be quite a modern thing that absolutely everyone hated the fact that Britain released slaves. No, people were pretty much always thankful, literally up until 5 minutes ago.
It's not. It's a shorter period of time. This would be realistic. Empire was hundreds of years. Slavery by itself, hundreds of years. Nazis, a short period of time. Did lots of damage, terrible. This is not a pro-Nazi propaganda. It's a totally awful. Holocaust is completely and utterly awful.
But
slavery is so expensive. It's so long. It's so many people just on slavery.
Yeah, the Nazis may have thrown black people in concentration camps, killed them in the streets, made them second-class citizens. But you know, think about that 300-year history. You know, Britain also treated them as second-class citizens. Yeah, fair enough, true. We then realised that we shouldn't be doing that. Did the Nazis ever realise that? Only after we wiped them out.
That's just slavery, right? We haven't added in anything else, right? So let's take slavery. Then take colonialism, British colonialism, underdevelopment of Africa. Slavery is part of this, right? Part of that underdevelopment. Places like Nigeria, places like Ghana, places like Kenya. I mean, actual atrocities, places like Kenya, Zimbabwe, etc. South Africa.
Again, I'm perfectly happy saying that the British Empire was not perfect. It's inevitable. It's a global spanning empire. I think absolutely every colony made all the correct decisions, like and moral decisions. No, obviously not. Do I think they made an awful lot of good decisions? Yeah. Do I think they made an awful lot of bad decisions? Yeah. Do I think that doing the big goods of ending slavery and destroying the Nazis probably makes up for all the bad decisions made throughout the history of the British Empire? Yeah, obviously. I literally don't know what else we could do that could be seen as good. Because Kehinde Andrews is just dismissing the fact that we ended slavery and decimated the Nazis. He's just dismissing it. It's like, oh, who cares about that? Do you understand how much was sacrificed for that? British lives were literally given in pursuit of emancipation of the transatlantic slave trade and the resulting slaves. People died. Millions of people died defeating the Nazis throughout the British Empire, whether it be in Africa, mainland Europe, wherever. And here's Kehinde Andrews saying, yeah, none of that makes up for the fact that British made mistakes throughout its empire, as, you know, there's things run by humans. Of course they were. But you are not being a fair person if you are unironically saying that the Nazis were better than the British simply because they couldn't make a country last more than 15 years.
Actual atrocities. Guns, murders, killings, deaths, famine, starvation, and then again, deaths from poverty due to that. Again, you're talking about just in Africa alone.
Germans well known for never using guns to commit atrocities. Just a ridiculous thing to say.
Take India. There's a paper came out about this. So there's actually academic research on this that came out. It suggested in just a 40-year period from I want to say 40-year period, but don't quote me on a 40-year period. But up to 1920, in India alone, it's by Jason Hinkle and the co-author.
It's by Jason Hinkle. Yeah, I'm definitely just dismissing this. I've said it before, by the way, but this is exactly how the grift works. They have a tight-knit community of about, 10 to 100 academics, something like that. And they just constantly cite each other, and what this then does is mean, oh, you've been cited 1 million times, therefore you're worth publishing a book over. And then they'll publish these grift books, publish these grift papers, and just effectively keep citing each other to make it look like that these studies are taken seriously when they're not. This is all done so that they can keep grifting money out of universities and people stupid enough to take them seriously. Luckily, as I say, barely getting 500 likes on a tweet promoting his standard black history stuff, and it's not working anymore. As I say, this is a white pill. He's saying this ridiculous stuff, having to go even more extreme than I've ever heard him go, and it's just got diminishing returns. You love to see it.
Suggests that 165 million Indians died because of the British Empire. 165 million.
Yeah, but this will be taking into account things like famines that you can't do anything about if the monsoon takes out all your food and then you get a drought so you can't plant them again. It takes into account all of these natural disasters, all of these things that don't necessarily have anything to do with the British, civil wars between tribes or whatever, and then just blames it on the British because they were in charge at the time. It's ridiculous. It's like blaming anyone who died in Hurricane Katrina on capitalism or the US state. It's just not reasonable. There's only so much you can do about an act of God. And famines famously never happened before the British went there, obviously. The Indians had it all sorted out. The British made sure they could never farm properly again when they came in. It's just a ridiculous thing to say.
Just in India. It's just India. No, it doesn't include slavery no more, doesn't include Africa no more, doesn't include the rest of Asia, doesn't include anywhere else. Mauritius. I mean, we're literally talking about hundreds of millions. It is undoubtedly true that the British Empire spanned centuries and killed hundreds of millions of black and brown people.
It is kind of surprising that, isn't it? Despite all of our time killing hundreds of millions of these black and brown people, one, black and brown people still want to come to Britain, despite the fact apparently it's so racist we killed hundreds of millions of them. Secondly, what's even more surprising is that during all these wars throughout the entirety of the empire, they were happily volunteering, moving over to Europe to fight in squads against the German menace. It's amazing, isn't it? Absolutely incredible. We kill hundreds of millions of them, they still volunteer to fight for us. Absolutely incredible. How did that happen? British propaganda must just be the best in the world.
Hundreds of millions, not a few, hundreds of millions in the pursuit of empire, wealth, etc. So all this, and really importantly, that progress that we're supposed to be celebrating is built on those deaths. Those deaths are why that progress happens. And you want to celebrate, say it's a good thing? Yeah, go get out of here. Wait.
No, believe it or not, when people are celebrating the progress, they are not celebrating millions and millions of deaths. Because you have to be really disingenuous to say that those millions and millions of deaths or the British killing black and brown people. That's a really disingenuous way of doing it. Again, not saying we didn't kill black and brown people unjustifiably. That obviously will have happened in 300 years of the British Empire, especially obviously with slavery. But guess what? Absolutely nobody says, oh, plantations with slaves, transatlantic slave trade, yeah, I'm proud of that. Nobody says that. What do they say? Oh, I'm proud we stopped that and made other people stop it too.
There is no comparison. You cannot compare the Nazi Germany period to the British Empire. Because it's so longer, and it's so much more brutal, and it's so much more catastrophic for the world.
The British Empire was much more brutal than Nazi Germany. Is a hell of a statement to make, I have to say. Nazis were so bad at what they did, they managed to start a world war against literally every other country in the world and get decimated from it, to the point where even the word fascism cannot be mentioned today. That is how brutal it is. Whereas when it comes to, people still want to call it space colonialism, because people understand that at the heart of it there is good reason for it. And it is perfectly possible to do without complete extermination of native people. I mean, there's no native people in space either, so we don't even have that problem. Yet there's no problem with the connotations of calling it colonialism.
Bigger problem here, even in defeating the Nazis, Britain drew on the empire, drew on soldiers, people, resources in Asia, in Africa.
Yeah, well, they weren't being exploited by the people at the time, were they? And even then, he's bringing up soldiers. Yeah, we still had volunteers from these places we apparently decimated. Just doesn't... Your accusations don't quite pan out in the real world, do they?
Right, front lines. About 2 million Africans died in the war. Served in the war, about 1 million died. Many millions in India, right? Famines in India caused Bengal famine 43. They could have solved the famine, but what did they do? They diverted, Churchill diverted food to the soldiers.
I love it. Oh, yeah, so Bengal famine. Yeah, Bengal famine, that's one I want to bring up. Oh, yeah, so Churchill diverted food away from there to the soldiers who were fighting Nazis. Yeah, two good reasons for that. One, obviously, what's the bigger threat? Obviously, the Nazis invading all of Europe. The idea was to stop their growth of an empire. Secondly, why did they divert it as well? Oh, because there was this thing called the Japanese blockade. It was a world war. There was a Pacific theatre, sorry. And yeah, the Japanese made it pretty difficult to actually get ships through to India. So what you're going to do? Oh, do this really risky thing of hopefully helping starving Indians. Yeah, I agree it would be a good thing to do. Or help with the war effort that's right at our front door. Like, what are you going to do in that situation? There is no one on Earth who would choose risk the sinking of these vital ships that transport food to go to India, where their front is not quite as progressed and developed as the Western Front was in Europe.
So, actually, even in the commission of beating the Nazis is not this big evil, big bad evil.
Even when we were beating the Nazis, we were committing these big, much worse evils than the Nazis. Yeah, sorry, man. I just can't take that seriously, and apparently neither can anyone else.
We took the deaths of millions and millions of black and brown people.
Another reason it's basically impossible to take him seriously is that he keeps laughing whenever he's bringing up millions and millions of black and brown people dead. It's because he can't even take those numbers seriously. He knows they're a lie. He's not even taking himself seriously. As I say, apparently we're here to laugh at his own statements with him. Incredible.
You literally cannot compare the two. Comparing Nazi Germany to the British Empire is totally ridiculous. Totally and utterly ridiculous. One is the long hundreds of millions. One is terrible, but a short-lived period, which was absolutely awful, absolutely horrendous. And also point out, has ended.
Why did it end, Kehinde? Why did it end? I love it. I just don't understand how you can be saying this. Like, oh yeah, awful, atrocious things happened, it was just terrible. Yeah, but you've got to realise there was a famine in India at the same time. And the British couldn't send aid there. How evil is that? Not very when you realise it's basically impossible to get there. My God.
British Empire, I tell you right now, has not really ended. It carries on. The consequences of it carry on today. In deaths, in the world that exists, in continued poverty and starvation in parts of the world, continues today.
It's quite amazing, isn't it, how we dedicate a percentage of our GDP to foreign aid, And we still get blamed for things we have absolutely nothing to do with. Again, we get blamed for famines, for God's sake. Things that have never happened in the history of the world before Britain, apparently.
But even more than that, the idea that the Nazi Germany is somehow separate from the British Empire, that's so historically stupid, I don't know what to say.
Well, Hitler said in Mein Kampf he was envious that Britain has this great swathing empire and he wants Germany to have something like that. Is that really what we're going to say here? If it wasn't Britain at the time, it would have been some other country. He wanted an empire much like Rome. Just because there was another empire in the modern day and it happened to be Britain he was envious of does not mean that Britain caused Hitler to want an empire. That's just stupid.
Like, there's a book by Zygmunt Bauman who talks about, it's called Modernity and Holocaust, and in there he says that we have this idea that the Nazis are somehow not modern, right? They're somehow anti-modern because of all the terrible things, the way they killed, it's anti-modern.
Oh yeah, I mean, people will want to really think of it as a thing of the past, especially Germans. It was the most horrific black spot in a history that you can have. But yeah, it's right. The Nazis were hyper-modernist. If anything, they were a very good reason as to look into the problems of modernity, atheism, race-based nationality, all these sorts of things, because they're kind of proof that they just make dystopia.
But actually, it's not true, right? Without what we call modernity, the process of industrialization, the process of science, the process of racialization, which comes into that, etc., you can't have the Nazis. The Nazis can only exist in this system created by Western capitalism. Right.
Nazis can only exist in a time of Western capitalism, despite the fact that they were socialist. I mean, are we really now going to try and say that the Nazis were capitalist? I mean, it's so debunked by so many people, I don't even think it's worth going into, but this guy listens to Jason Hickel, so I'm kind of not surprised he's brought this up.
One, technology. To kill 6 million people in a few years is actually very difficult, right? So you need scientific technology, scientific rationality, scientific bureaucracy to do it. That comes from Western so-called modernity.
I don't know, Genghis Khan did his best to kill that many people as he rode across Europe. But, you know, having said that, yes, I will agree that 6 million people in a couple of years, or a few years, however you want to put it, that can only be done on an industrial scale. Yep, that is definitely a consequence of modernity. That's fine, I guess. So what, we're saying that because progress can end up being used in an evil manner, we need to get rid of modernity? Like, what? No. It's like, we are able to do good things with modernity and not kill 6 million people. It's perfectly possible. Every other country managed it. Well, not every other country. Communist countries killed even more than Hitler.
The idea of race. What do the Nazis do? They racialize the Jews. They look, Jews are not people, they are untermenschen, underhumans, not subhuman. Where does that idea come from? That is the very idea that is the heart of the British Empire.
I mean, the anti-Semitism that came along with the Germans was a very German thing. Britain did not have the same streak of anti-Semitism as Germany, mainly because after Oliver Cromwell allowed the Jews back in, they had been making plenty of waves of migration to come back, and in a lot of instances they obviously integrated with the wider community. You know, we ended up having people of Jewish background as Prime Minister with Disraeli eventually. It is hardly fair to say that Germany are only anti-Semitic and caused the Holocaust because of Britain. There's simply no evidence for that. The whole Aryan thing, yeah, pretty purely German.
The black and brown people are not really people, are subhuman, right? And it's that very same technology, actual technology, race science, which was just science back in the day, that is used to prove the Jews are not really people, right? That is used to racialize them. So that science and race, industry, the industrial slaughter of people, you can't do the Holocaust. It's not possible, right? Ideas that the only difference in the ideas in the Holocaust is that they were attached to people who we now believe to be white.
I'm so confused. He's blaming all this stuff on modernity, which is obviously trying to say that Britain is the father of modernity, which, again, Giga Chad moment. But then how do you square the circle of, oh, well, if the Nazis did all this with modernity, why didn't Britain? You know, we didn't put people in concentration camps to kill them. We did put people in internment camps, no doubt about that. However, they were internment camps. They were there to detain people, not to kill them. Now, when you're in a war with, say, the Boers in South Africa, and we had internment camps there, and, you know, you're struggling with supply lines, there's going to be starvations, sure. Again, nobody's perfect. However, it's a ridiculous thing I've heard many times, which luckily it seems to have completely fallen out of the zeitgeist. But the idea that British internment camps inspired the Holocaust concentration camps, beyond absurd. The Bolsheviks were making camps around the place as well. Guess what? Germans started seeing that quite a lot. It's more than likely that's where the idea from them came from.
But the actual idea of there are inhuman races who can be disposed of, that is the foundation of the British Empire. That is what the British Empire is built on.
This is, of course, ludicrous. If the British Empire thought that, we'd never have ended slavery. Like, the rug's pulled under you from there, as far as I'm concerned. You are just a liar. A complete charlatan. I am glad you are not making as much money off this complete nonsense as you used to.
Right? The British Empire is built on that very premise, promoting that very premise, and the science and technology that leads to the racialization and the ultimate holocaust of Jewish people is inextricably linked to the rise of the British Empire.
Some people come up with a theory of race science. Yes, quite a lot of it does come from the British Empire, I'm happy to say that. Guess what? It does not then necessarily mean that you make classes of people and then treat them differently. We were doing that under slavery, sure. And then, how can you be saying this when it comes to the 20th century? And there were plenty of people of these different races coming to Britain and being considered fully British. How can you possibly say that? Britain did step one of this, and then Nazi Germany went 10 steps further. Apparently that's our fault. Okay, if you want to be that ridiculous, you can blame anything on the British Empire. Oh, that's exactly what you're trying to do. Amazing.
One of the things that happens in the way that we talk about the Holocaust is just terrible in many, many ways, right? We completely ignore the fact that it's actually German colonialism in Southeast Africa, right? So in Tanzania, it's a massive massacre in Namibia of the Herero people. The Herero people are trying to get reparations. I mean, the Herero populations only just got back to where it would have been had the genocide not happened, right? So this genocide happens in early in 1904, 1905, 1906.
Another thing I find pretty just absolutely amazing is that he can cite Portuguese genocides, he can cite German genocides. His British genocide claims famines. It's just not comparable.
That really lays the foundation for the genocide that happens later with Jewish people, right?
Oh, so it didn't come from the British Empire then. It came from the Germans' own empire in South Africa. Southwest Africa, whatever. How am I supposed to take him seriously when he's just contradicted himself?
Now, importantly, scientists, people like Eugene Fisher, who were working on this, who were taking hair samples, and guess who they were working with? British leading so-called scientists, right? UCL, University College London.
Nazis' lead science experiment done by capturing people during a genocide. UCL apparently sends some scientists over. I've Googled, I've not found evidence on this, but I'll take him at his word. Apparently this is the British Empire's fault. Again, it's amazing how he's tried to claim that this was all inspired by the British Empire, and it turns out it's actually the German Empire that are, again, going 10 steps ahead of British racists. Like, kinda amazing that he's trying to claim this and then contradicting himself like this.
Robert Pearson, whose Pearson is still the name of a test you do in psychology, by the way. Francis Galton, this idea of eugenics, racial hygiene. Right, they're all working together to craft these ideas about racial science.
I've Googled Robert Pearson. I'm finding absolutely nothing on him nor the Pearson test. However, Francis Galton did exist. Actually, looking through Francis Galton's pages, I believe that Kehinde meant Carl Pearson, and yes, they did both work on research into, hereditary or passed on behaviours and eugenics and things like that. These were men of science who had their beliefs as well as studying into them. There is only so much you can do in one lifetime. However, I am failing to see how these two men worked with Fisher in Southwest Africa. But either way, these people were eugenicists. They also happen to be socialists. I just want to point that out. And it's fair to say they were white supremacists. Now, if they worked with German scientists in Southwest Africa, I would not be surprised. However, to say these two men were representative of the general view of the Brits at the time, I think you'd be mistaken. Eugenicists, sure, they would be seen as more acceptable than they are today. However, this is a time before the Nazis and before they knew that their ideas could be influenced, would be influenced to kill 6 million people. Basically what I'm saying is, if you're trying to represent the entirety of the British people by a couple of men who were socialists, liked Karl Marx, and advocated for policies and positions that just kept on losing, then basically you're picking out people who were exceptions to the general Brits. And therefore it's stupid to try and say, oh, it's the Brits' fault that the Germans caused the Holocaust. No, it was two socialists.
The very ideas that we're not human beings, that is fundamentally underpinned by the British Empire, by British Empire research, the British Empire rationality, by British Empire reason. There are connections between the scientists and the work and the politicians and all of them, right?
I mean, I'm not being funny, but there's so many examples throughout time of scientists going down a route and then it turns out to be a very long tangent that turned out to be a dead end. It is as old as science itself. Like, yeah, the shape of your head indicating how your personality is. Yeah, obviously that's wrong. However, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater if you then think that certain mental characteristics are not hereditary. IQ is one of the most hereditary things on the planet. Like, you'd probably argue that if IQ was the start of all this race science stuff, you'd blame studies into IQ causing the Holocaust. Like, this is just... your entire thesis is ridiculous. There is no wonder that you've run out of grift.
And that is what feeds and leads to the Nazism. You can't have Nazism without the racism, which is at the heart of the British Empire.
Again, you can have all this race science stuff, though, and, put people, race in hierarchies, whatever, and apparently still consider people of different races your equal when it comes to citizenship and being a subject of the crown. Because that is pretty much what happened in Britain. We didn't put black, brown and Jewish people in prison or in camps, did we? We in fact did the opposite and said, if you're here and not causing trouble, you're one of us.
The two things are totally not really connected, right? The idea of empire, the idea of expansion. Hitler was massively complimentary about the British Empire. He actually wanted to model his invasion and use of Poland on the way to Britain had the Raj in India.
Well, 300 civil servants in charge of the entire subcontinent. I suppose I've got to bear in mind that Kehinde Andrews unironically thinks that the Brits basically just interned and holocausted 100 million Indians or something stupid and also forced famines upon them. I suppose that's what he's thinking of when it comes to the empire. However, Hitler was purely talking about the way it was run. He was not talking about genociding the place the way the Brits genocided India. Because we didn't genocide India.
Right. He saw what Britain had done and created the largest empire that the world has ever seen. 24% of the world's population, 24% of the world's landmass. And wanted to emulate it, but with the Aryan race.
Yeah, and according to you, that is not as bad as what the British did. Again, do you seriously think that if the transatlantic slave trade was still going on, the Nazis would stop it? Get out of here.
Hey, so these ideas from Hitler aren't... They're not foreign or alien to Britain and the British Empire. They take those ideas and they take them extreme.
Yeah, because why didn't it happen in Britain, even though we were much more powerful than them? Oh, because we rejected it. We didn't like the idea of eugenics. We certainly did not like the idea of treating other people as non-citizens just because they were not white. Enoch Powell even pointed out, if they're integrated, they're indistinguishable from the Brits. That is what integration is. People saw that it was happening at a very small scale because most of these people wanted to stay in their indigenous lands. That is perfectly reasonable.
And I know, I can't even say they take it extreme because the British Empire was already extreme. They just take them and apply them to white people, apply them to Europe. So the fundamental principle of the British Empire is you can go and colonize anywhere else in the world, as long as it's not Europe.
Yeah, the reason for that was because, European countries were on equal footing when it came to their power levels. Again, I'm not saying that invasive forces were the best thing to do with colonization. Typically what was happening in these colonial wars was that it was different European countries fighting each other. The natives just didn't have a chance. Hence an awful lot of them would actually try and cooperate because overall it was just better for them to cooperate than try and fight a war they were never going to win.
Right. As long as it's not white people. So you can do whatever you want in Africa, Asia, around the world.
I mean, no, not really. World War II entirely came about because Germans and Japanese were doing whatever they wanted.
But when it comes to Europe, you keep that away, right? So this is all that Hitler does really is just takes that to the next step and says, well, no, look, Jews actually aren't really white, so we can exterminate them. Eastern Europeans, they're a bit backwards too, so we need to take them over.
I don't get it. Why are you acting like the British put black people in concentration camps and gassed them? Why are you pretending that happened? Oh, Hitler just did what the British did. He just did it to Jews as well. No. He's like 10, 20 steps ahead of a route we refuse to go down because, yeah, it's a bad idea.
But the idea these are separate is one of the worst ways you understand history, right? So, no, the British Empire... the British Empire versus the Nazis is not good guy versus bad guys. Bad guy versus bad guy.
About the worst reading on World War II I think I've ever seen in my life. Who in Kehinde Andrew's mind is any type of good guy in history? He can't come up with anyone that's actually been alive that is a good guy. It's a lot like Otto English and all these lefty historians. I'm just going to go through every single person in history that has ever been seen as good and tell you why they're terrible. And then it gets you in positions where you have to say Mother Teresa is one of the worst people alive. It's just absolutely diabolical thinking. There's no other reason Kehinde Andrews made this than to signal, oh, don't forget, British and white people are bad. Please pay for my rent. Again, you should be white-pilled. This isn't working anymore.
And the British Empire wins, actually, because it has more. It is the bigger bad guy, right? It has controls large parts of the world.
Yeah. What would you rather? Would you rather the British Empire never existed and we live under Nazi Germany right now, or would you rather that the British Empire existed to stop them? What an absolutely insane man.
Right? Can you get America is essentially an extension of the British Empire. Let's just be honest, right? In this framework of the West, right? Can draw on all this power, right? So where America comes into the war and is massively important in the war, but America is a production of the British Empire.
Oh my God! 1776, man. They were separate from us. They were a product of their own, as they called it, manifest destiny. And yeah, Americans didn't treat Native Americans as they should have. As I say, every expansionist power is going to run into problems, and America is no exception. And yeah, they had their own eugenicists and all that as well, but guess what they did in the end too? Although it took a lot longer than it did for Britain, they ended up rejecting racial hierarchy as well. I'd love to say at this point as well, what would you rather have? Kehinde, an American empire, or a British empire? And I swear to God, if he says I want no empires, it's just not worth talking to him. There will always be a world hegemon. There has been ever since the days of empire. They're not going away.
Genocide of the Americans, slavery of Africans, continued colonialism, industry development. America is just the British Empire on steroids in America. It's an adjunct, it's an offshoot of the British Empire.
I love it. It's the British Empire on steroids. I guess you can call it that. As you say, it's still separate though. The British Empire was very, very good at being anti-radical. And here you are trying to be radical, and guess what? You've been rejected. What a shock.
So, the British Empire in the West and the Allies are able to win because of Africa, Asia, America, the empire, because of colonial disposition.
Yeah, guess what? They volunteered out of their own free agency and will. They said, yes, I would like to be part of the British Empire and its army. Please let me fight our enemies. Great lads.
So, you cannot celebrate this. It's not something to celebrate. Like you celebrate, we created this thing. I say we. My family was part of the people who died in this, so I won't say we.
My family died. How are you alive? What? Let's be realistic. You probably have ancestors that volunteered in the war as well to fight for the British. No doubt you have slave ancestors as well. Pretty much every black person will. It's not a surprise. And what, you're gonna say now? Oh, now is the time I actually want an apology. Guess what? Prince Albert already gave one. You're all free. Slavery is seen as one of the most disgusting things you can do to another human being in modernity. Oh, but it made the Holocaust. Yeah, only if you're dishonest and disingenuous.
But it created this monster that created another monster, and the monster beast, the smaller monster. And we're supposed to celebrate? Nah, get out of here, man. British Empire is not... There should be no ever be a debate, discussion about whether the British Empire was a force for good.
Well, when he's right, he's right. There should not be a debate on it. It was a force for good. Anyway, there's more to this video, but I think I'm already really repeating points. We're over an hour and a half in. I think we've reached I think we've gone beyond the point where it's got interesting, really. So if you made it this far, well done. Anyway, it's shilling time. Tonight it's Tosh Newscast. To be honest, we will probably be doing the newscast before the point this announcement goes out, so that might end up being pointless, but anyway, I'm going to say it now anyway. Tomorrow, Wednesday, 8 PM, I will be playing more Dustborn. Yes, I do hate my life. Next Monday, we will be carrying on with the Antiquity stream, where we'll be continuing to talk about the Peloponnesian Wars, so do come along to that. Next week, it's a Tosh Talks. The topic, of course, we are yet to decide. Please join the Worcester Club Discord if you want to get involved in that. And Laughing at the Guardian will return next Saturday as well, of course, videos as and when I can make them. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Please subscribe, become a member, all that good stuff. Finally, once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.